This will sound very strange, but David Blaine's ascension stunt in September of 2020, in which he ascended into the sky using helium balloons and then dropped and fell from 25,000 feet and then parachuted back to Earth, is a major prophetic sign that symbolized the fall of man and predicted the exact date of the stock market peak on January 5th, 2022, when the stock market fell from sky-high levels and began its epic, biggest ever in history stock market crash. And David Blaine's fall from the sky is also predicting the crash of Kamala Harris when she will fall from the sky in her plane on June 30th, 2023. This video is also predicting that the stock market made a secondary peak on the date 2/2 and has now begun the strongest stage of the crash. Today is March 1st. The crash is getting going now. And within a couple of months, everyone will know that we are in a crash, and a general atmosphere of fear and panic will pervade society. And this video will explain how this date, February 2nd, is predicted to be the peak, and how it is relevant in God's prophetic signs. I think you will agree that this is a very interesting video. And again, today's date is March 1st, 2023. The post date of this video proves that this prediction is being made on March 1st. And also, these time-stamped emails and forensic notes PDF documents also prove that these predictions are being made ahead of time. All right, I'm going to explain something truly amazing in this video. Today's date is March 1st, 2023. And today I'm going to talk about, or in this video, I'm going to talk about a prophetic sign that occurred in September of 2020 that was truly astounding. And at the time, it predicted a certain couple of things here. I'm going to be talking about the day that David Blaine, in his stunt, he named Ascension, fell from the sky. This was a prophetic sign from God that symbolized the fall of man. The fall of man in the book of Genesis, the Garden of Eden. This fall of man sign was symbolized through David Blaine's fall from the sky. First of all, David Blaine is someone that God uses in his signs. One big reason being, or how he has used him, is that he was born on the date 4/4, April 4th, in 1973. 4/4 is very important because of it being prophetically significant due to the 44th president. But the date 4/4 in 1973, which connects to, by the way, other 4/4 dates, including, for example, exactly 23 years after 4/4 in 1950, which is one of the big reasons for the dates 4/4, is because on 4/4 in 1950, the UN Trustee Council officially submitted their report to make Jerusalem an international city, which is the biggest transgression against God described in Bible prophecy. The desire to divide Israel through the United Nations. But anyway, so David Blaine was born on the date 4/4, and this was also the date that the World Trade Center Twin Towers were officially opened. Of course, World Trade Center also hints at the United Nations trying to divide Israel. Oh, and the reason for the exact 23 years is because this also is used to point to Barack Obama, who wore jersey number 23 when he played basketball in high school. The 44th president, the basketball president that installed a basketball court at the White House, for example, and is famously known for being the basketball president, wore jersey number 23 when he played basketball. In fact, his actual jersey is the highest selling jersey of all time. It is higher. It gets more money at auctions than does Jordan's or LeBron James's high school jersey. His jersey number 23 is paired with the number 44 in God's signs, and that's how God confirms his signs. He pairs, one big way he does confirm his prophetic signs is pairing the number 23 and 44 together, and so that's why it's exactly 23 years from 4-4 in 1950 to 4-4 in 1973, the date that David Blaine was born, which was also the day that the World Trade Center Twin Towers were officially opened. And Barack Obama, the 44th president that wore jersey number 23, is the Antichrist that will lead the world in its division of Israel through the United Nations. And this is the reason for this 23 years connection in between these two 4-4 dates that connect the United Nations and the World Trade Center. And in the end times period, the Antichrist, Barack Obama, will be in Jerusalem on the Temple Mount, as described in Bible prophecy. And on 9/11, the second plane hit the first tower 17 minutes after the first plane. So the second plane hit the second tower, the south tower, 17 minutes after the first plane struck the north tower. David Blaine is famous for holding the Guinness record, the world record for holding his breath underwater at literally just a couple of seconds or a few seconds. I think it was 4 seconds actually, over 17 minutes. And that wasn't by his design ahead of time. He didn't decide he's going to just do it for 17 minutes and then come up for air. That's literally how long he could hold his breath for. And he didn't know exactly how long it would be ahead of time, but it just so happened to be 17 minutes. And that was live on a Oprah Winfrey show. And that's because it's David Blaine is a God's sign pointing to 9/11 or the Twin Towers. Also, David Blaine is born in New York City, the Big Apple, and David Blaine is famously compared to Harry Houdini, the other magician, extreme performer. And Harry Houdini is famously from Appleton. And in Western art, the fall of man is depicted with an apple. And that's why David Blaine, who was born in the Big Apple and is compared with Harry Houdini, who is from Appleton, fell from the sky. And that's why it is a sign that is symbolizing or symbolized the fall of man. This prophetic sign that was David Blaine's fall from the sky, that symbolized the fall of man, was a massive judgment warning sign for America. Prior to this date, which was September 2nd, I had predicted and documented in videos. I don't think they're still posted because since then I was cancel cultured, those videos. I probably could retrieve it somewhere, but it wouldn't be documented. But anyway, the point is that prior to that date, September 2nd, 2020, I also predicted that at the time that David Blaine would fall from the sky, Apple stock, Apple as an iPhone stock, the company's stock would also crash. Not only did it crash on the same day, it literally started crashing when David Blaine started falling from the sky in his broadcast. And that was a significant drop for Apple stock on that day, and it didn't recover that amount. It made, in other words, a significant peak. It had been, and that was a peak. Oh, that not only did I predict that the stock would crash on that day, but that it would peak on that day. And so in other words, prior to that peak, it had been lower and then was making a peak, and it was a significant interim peak, and then it started crashing, literally as David Blaine started crashing or falling from the sky. And then the stock didn't recover and surpass that peak that was made on September 2nd until late December. So it was a significant peak that didn't recover until months later. And that was predicted ahead of time. Also, just days before that, in August, a couple of weeks before that, I forget exactly the date, but Apple became the first ever U.S. stock to surpass $2 trillion. The company surpassed $2 trillion in value just prior to this. And also, just a couple of days prior to this, Apple stock split. It made a historic split. I think it split into 4. But anyway, that was also, Apple was in the news, in other words, at that time. There's much more to that, which I explained in the other videos. It also connected to Apple donating money for the supplying of purchasing of masks during COVID and all that. But anyway, that would be another rabbit trail there. So David Blaine, anyways, I predicted ahead of time that this would be a prophetic sign, that it would be symbolism for the fall of man, and that Apple stock would fall on that day. And that proved that I was correct in saying that it would be symbolizing the fall of man, because of the apple being the symbol in Western art for the fall of man. And I also knew at that time, and I predicted so in videos shortly after that, in the fall or the autumn of 2020, that the fall of man, or the fall of David Blaine, would someday directly connect to the day that the stock market as a whole would ultimately make its all-time peak and then begin its historic crash, the biggest crash in history. It would make its peak. The date that it would peak would somehow directly connect to the fall of David Blaine from the sky. One other thing while I'm remembering regarding the significance of David Blaine's fall from the sky is that he went up 25,000 feet with his helium balloons. If I didn't mention, this is how he did his stunt. He drifted up into the atmosphere with helium balloons and then cut loose and then fell and then parachuted back to Earth. That was over the 48th state, and the Antichrist will be the 48th president. Arizona. But anyway, 25,000 feet is significant also because 14 times in the prophet book of Ezekiel in the Bible, it is mentioned 25,000. The number 25,000 is a main dimensional number used 14 times in the book of Ezekiel to describe the rebuilt Messianic temple, the temple that will be rebuilt in Jerusalem and in which will dwell the Messiah, Lord Jesus Christ, in the 1,000 years of peace that will begin in 2024. And so that's why he went up to 25,000 feet. And it was literally 25,000 feet, which he began his descent from, which made it prophetic. Also, the 48th president, the Antichrist, is described in Bible prophecy as being on the Temple Mount, setting up his abomination during the end times, just prior to his defeat at the return of Lord Jesus Christ. The 48th president, that's why David Blaine ascended to 25,000 feet and then fell back to the 48th state. Okay, so now the most central prophecy in the Bible is the 70 weeks prophecy. That's the title of this prophecy. It's in Daniel chapter 9. And this prophecy describes the Antichrist in the 70th week, which is a symbolic period. Those prophecy people that think it is a literal 7 years, it isn't. And the prediction being made in this video is proof of this, that this is the correct understanding of that. And the Antichrist is described in the 70th week, and he's making a covenant with the Lord's people, and also the 69 weeks leading up to the 70 weeks is a description that reveals the exact day of Jesus's triumphal entry, which was his arrival officially into Jerusalem on the date Nisan 10 in the Hebrew calendar in 32 AD. And that's an amazing prophecy, which I have explained in other videos. Why don't I just take a quick crack at it, just to give it quickly. The prophecy describes a decree issued including the rebuilt walls of Jerusalem. The prophecy describes a decree to rebuild Jerusalem, including rebuilding its walls. And the only decree of the four in the Bible that includes the walls of Jerusalem is the one described in Nehemiah chapter 2. And that date was March 14th. Yes, March 14th, 445 BC, because it describes it as being the first day of Nisan in the 20th year of Artaxerxes, which would have been 445 BC. And the Royal British Observatory confirms that date was March 14th. Anyway, it's then 69 weeks, according to the prophecy, to the day that the Messiah will arrive and then be put to death. And by the way, this was recorded in Daniel chapter 9, and the book of Daniel was written a long time before Jesus. The Dead Sea Scrolls prove that, by the way. And of course, Jews, as you know, most Jews don't believe that Jesus was the Messiah. And most Jews don't believe that the Messiah will be put to death when he arrives, but this is exactly what it says. And hence why the Apostle Paul talks about the mystery of the blindness of the Jews, and it is a true mystery how they don't know that Jesus is the Messiah and don't know their Bible in Bible prophecy regarding the Christ. But anyway, it says that he will arrive and then be put to death after 69 weeks, and the word for week in Hebrew is Shabua, and this word doesn't mean 7 days of a week. The prophecy is called the 70 weeks prophecy, but this doesn't mean 7 days. The word for week that is translated as week doesn't mean 7 days as in a week of days. The word Shabua in Hebrew is a word that means a unit of 7. So in English, we have a word that denotes a couple, something that is two of something we call as being a couple. Likewise, if we have a few of something, it's generally considered to be 3 of something. And several, arguably, is rooted in a unit of 7 as well. But in Hebrew, there is a word that literally means a unit of 7, and that is Shabua, and that's the word that's used in this prophecy. And so anyway, 69 weeks, as in a literal week of 7 days, 69 weeks wouldn't have been enough time to rebuild Jerusalem and the temple. It took 2 decades to build the first temple. And so that wasn't enough time. But if we, instead of doing 7 days of a week, we use a period of years, 7 years, that's when we get the shocking result. So it's 69 times 7 years, and then we get the shocking result. If we add 69 times 7 years to March 14th, 445 BC, the date of the decree, which the prophecy says to add the days to, if we add that number of years, we get a shocking result. 69 times 7 is 483 years, but all ancient cultures, up until a certain point in history, I forget when, they all used 360-day calendar years. And I literally mean all ancient cultures did that. The reason why is they divided the stars into 12 zodiacs with 30 degrees each. Anyway, a prophetic year in the Bible is a 360-day year, and so 483 years times 360 days is 173,880 days. And if we add that number of days to March 14th, 445 BC, we get exactly April 8th, 32 AD, which the Royal British Observatory confirms as being the Sunday before the full moon Passover in 32 AD. And the Passover, Jesus was crucified on a Passover, and in the Gospel of Luke, it says that Jesus began his ministry of teaching and healing people in the 15th year of Tiberius, and history shows that Tiberius began his reign in 14 AD. So 14 plus 15 years, 14 AD plus 15 years is 32 AD. 29 AD. And in the Gospel of John, it is recorded that during his ministry of teaching and healing people, he observed 4 Passovers and was crucified on the 4th one. So 29, 30, 31, 32. Jesus was crucified on the Passover in 32 AD. And another way we know that, by the way, is that the year that he was crucified needed to be a year in which there was an extra month of Adar. The Jewish calendar is a calendar based on the sun and the moon, uses the sun and the moon for its calculations, and every 7 years in a 19-year cycle, there needs to be an extra month, a leap year, if you will, an extra month of Adar, the name of the month, Adar. But anyway, there needs to be an extra month, and the years surrounding that, there is no extra month of Adar. It needs to be 5,888 moons from the decree, and this is the only year that fits. Furthermore, there are numerous other clear, profound, indisputable prophetic signs that God has used that confirm that Jesus was crucified in 32 AD. It was not 30 AD or 33 AD. It was 32 AD. That's a fact. Okay? And so anyway, this prophecy also proves that. because we get 32 AD when we add the number of days to the decree in 445 BC. And and as I was saying, it's the Sunday before the Passover when Jesus was crucified. And in Christianity, the Sunday before the Passover when Jesus was crucified is known as Palm Sunday, which was the triumphal entry, the official arrival of Jesus into Jerusalem when he rode in on a donkey. And that's why prophecy is astounding. We have the exact number of days from the decree. Now, I apologize for going off out of that tangent. I wouldn't normally do that, except that's just the most amazing thing ever. And I imagine that there will be some new people listening to this video, so I wanted to do that. But the point I was trying to get to here is that as I said, I knew at the time that God would somehow directly connect the day that David Blaine would rise up into the sky and then fall to the day that the stock market would make its peak after rising and then beginning its crash. And exactly 70 weeks after David Blaine fell from the sky on September 2nd, 2020, was the stock market peak, the all-time peak that was made on January 5th, 2022. And the stock market is currently the stock market is well below that peak. It has begun its crash, as was predicted. Now, I didn't know ahead of time, although I should have. I didn't know ahead of time of January 5th that would be the all-time peak. But anyway, the Lord gave us a stock market sign on that date. One of the prophetic signs on the date of January 5th, 2022 was a prophetic fire in Philadelphia on 23rd Street. 12 people died. The number 12 is symbolism for the church, as is the Church of Philadelphia, which is why God uses the city of Philadelphia for this reason. Also, Pentecost symbolizes the church, and fire symbolizes Pentecost. As, for example, it was tongues of fire that came down on the disciples in the upper room on the first Pentecost of the church age. So this fire in Philadelphia was prophetic. 8 people died. Eight of the deaths were children. They were all from the same family, and it was 12 deaths in the same house on 23rd Street, and it was on the 800 block. And that hints at 888, the gematria of the name Jesus in Greek. Greek letters, like Roman letters, are numbers also, and the equivalent numeric value of the name Jesus in Greek is 888. But anyway, it was on 23rd Street, and that's relevant, as I'll explain in a second. But the stock market peaked on that day, and I think the high peak, the close was 36,952 points. If we subtract 36,952, or if I'm wrong, whatever number that was on the peak, if we subtract that number from that date, we get the date 11/4 in 1920. The date 11/4 is hinting at 11 times 4 equals 44. And that connects with the stock market number and the equivalent days to the fire on 23rd Street. And as I just explained earlier in this video, God pairs 23 and 44 together to confirm the signs and connections. The 44th president, the basketball president, wore jersey number 23. And so from the fire on the 23rd Street, we subtract the number of days that the stock market closed at. We get the date 11/4, which hints at 44. But also on that day, in the Philippines, which was U.S. territory at the time, which makes this sign relevant, it has to be an American sign because we're talking about the American Antichrist. And furthermore, America is God's Gentile nation, and God is passing judgment on America and then ending the age. So anyway, at that time, the Philippines was U.S. territory, and a ferry boat capsized, and 44 people drowned, and most of them were eaten by sharks, and sharks are Antichrist symbolism. It was 44 people drowned on the date 4/4, or 11/4, which hints at 11 times 4 equals 44, and again, it connects to the fire on the 23rd Street. So that's another confirmation, another pairing of 23 and 44. Okay, and and this date in 1920 is the only date that I'm aware of on which there was a prophetic sign in 1920. Around that time of the early 20th century, there's only a handful of dates that I know of. And one of the others is 11/4 in 1922. Again, another 11/4 date. On that date, the tomb of King Tut was discovered in the Valley of Kings. And in the Bible, Pharaoh, the king of Egypt, is Antichrist symbolism. And that's why this is a prophetic sign. The date that King Tut's tomb, the Pharaoh of Egypt, his tomb was discovered, on the date 11/4, which hints at the 44th president, the American Pharaoh, the Antichrist, Barack Obama, the 44th president, which was, by the way, the reason for the prophetic signs involving the horse, the famous Triple Crown winner, American Pharaoh. But that's another subject. But anyway, this date 11/4 in 1922 and the date 11/4 in 1920, if we add 99 years exactly and 101 years exactly, respectively, to these two dates, we get 11/4 in 2021. And there are many prophetic signs that occurred on that date. It was a huge date that was predicted ahead of time. One of them being for the things, and also SpaceX, which is also symbolism for the thing. The X is symbolism for the mark of the thing, the mark of the AC. Okay, so anyway, the point there, just to confirm, it's just more confirmation of the prophetic significance of the sign on 11/4 in 1920. But 99 years and 101 years hints at 9/11, and that's why. Okay, so now there's more confirmation for the prophetic significance of the capsized boat in which 44 people drowned on 11/4 to 1920, and then adding to get the number of days to get to the stock market peak on January 5th, 2022. All right, now, as I said, at the time of David Blaine's fall from the sky, I knew two things. One, that ultimately it would directly connect to the day that the stock market would make its peak and crash, and it would ultimately connect directly to the day that Kamala Harris would fall from the sky and crash. And through her replacement will rise the Antichrist, the 44th president. And so, and in fact, for a long while, I actually believed that the two events would occur on the same date. I, for a while, thought that it would made sense that the stock market would peak on the same day that Kamala Harris would fall from the sky. The stock market begin its crash from sky-high levels because it's a bubble. But if we add from the day that David Blaine fell from the sky, it's exactly 70 weeks, which is extremely prophetic, as I explained, to the day January 5th and the stock market peak. And then from that date, it's another, in turn, exact 70 weeks to the date it is predicted that Kamala Harris will fall from the sky and crash in her plane. We have the crash of the stock market connecting with 70 weeks to the predicted date that Kamala Harris will crash from the sky, which connects to the sky-high levels of the stock market beginning of its crash.
Actually, it is now believed that May 11th will be a step in the trail of signs that is leading to the date that Kamala Harris will die in a plane crash, the predicted date of June 30th, which will be 50 days after May 11th. That will be explained more in other videos, but this 70 weeks is nonetheless no less significant with its connection to May 11th, because this is how God's big picture of signs works. He connects these trails of signs and these steps, and when Kamala Harris, for example, will crash on June 30th, it will also prove the significance of May 11th. This, of course, is being recorded a long time before May 11th, and it is expected that there will be a relevant prophetic sign on that date that will confirm this analysis, which is that May 11th will be 50 days, a prophetic 50 days before June 30th.
And so from David Blaine's fall, it is 70 weeks to the beginning of the stock market crash from sky-high levels, and then in turn another exact 70 weeks to the date it is predicted that Kamala Harris will fall from the sky and crash. And this date, May 11th, the date is predicted that Kamala Harris will crash, May 11th, 2023, This was known quite a while before I realized this connection. In other words, this ended up being just a confirmation. I didn't discover this date through adding 70 weeks to January 5th. And so it was stunning confirmation of this prediction for Harris's crash. All right, now I'm going to talk about something here called the Elliott wave principle. This is something that I've personally been following for many years. Since 2002, I picked up the book Conquer the Crash, the best-selling book by Robert Prechter, when I was in the bookstore one day. And I immediately recognized that it was truth. And now I'm going to prove to you that it's from God. The Elliott wave principle is a principle that God uses. It's found throughout the natural world. I'm just going to show it to you here. All right, so the Elliott wave principle is very simple and elegant, and this is why it's found throughout nature. It's nature's way of achieving progress while still having corrections. I should say it's nature's most efficient way of achieving progress or moving towards progress while still having undulating corrections, which makes the progress healthy. Progress without any sort of correction is unhealthy and is bound to collapse. So it's this 5-wave pattern. And here in this chart, we have the 2008 crash as an example of this 5-wave pattern. And you can clearly see it, okay? Now, it's a fractal pattern. If you zoom in or zoom out at any different degree, you see the same pattern. And this pattern, by the way, is not only found throughout the natural world, it's found in human social collective behavior, collective behavior on a social level. We find this same Elliott wave pattern as we find in the natural world. And there's reasons for that, which I will explain the theory. Why don't I explain the theory first before explaining the 5-wave pattern? The reason why this pattern shows up is because in human behavior, is because humans have an instinct to follow their peers, follow other people when it comes to making decisions, especially decisions in which there is a lot of incomplete information. And there's nothing like an incomplete information decision like investing in finances, or making a financial decision. No one person can have the complete picture of information in order to know what the future holds. You would need to know the mind of every single person for one thing. But even then, that wouldn't be useful because people aren't thinking rationally when it comes to collective social psychology. They're just following each other. Although they don't realize it, they all rationalize it in their own minds, but unconsciously, they are following everyone else. For example, fashion. Fashion is fashion because it's people following other people. And people think that to themselves, oh, I really like this now. You know, I'm really liking this particular thing. I'm going to go buy it and start wearing it. Whereas they didn't like it before, but it all of a sudden occurred to them that they like it, but they don't realize that unconsciously the reason why they like it is because other people are doing it. That's the reason why for fashion. But this applies to all sorts of things. That's collective social behavior. And the reason for it is we have in our brains are made up of a neocortex, and underneath that is the mammalian brain, and underneath that is the really primitive reptilian brain. As we go deeper into the brain, the more instinctual and autopilot it is. And so in the mammalian brain, we have this instinct to herd, like sheep, like going with the herd, going with the crowd. This is what produces the crowd psychology. And the reason why this was developed is because it was beneficial for us to have this instinct, because the majority of the time going with the others, especially when there's incomplete information, proves to be, it turns out to be beneficial for one's survival. Your chances of surviving are higher if you just follow the crowd, but not all the time. There are some times when following the crowd will hurt you and it leads off the cliff, like lemmings. There's the metaphor of the lemmings off of the cliff because of the rodent-like animal that herds, and sometimes they run together in a herd off of a tall cliff and fall into the ocean and die. That's the lemmings, right? So that's an example of how sometimes herding can be not beneficial and be counterproductive and even decrease one's chances of survival. Like, for example, bubbles, asset bubbles. So in a bubble, everyone's feeding off of each other. Everyone's just copying what everyone else is saying, but they don't realize it though. It's unconscious. But the talking heads are copying what other talking heads on TV are saying, and everyone's just following what they're saying, and it just feeds off each other. It's like a loop. It's a loop that's feeding into the narrative and the mood swing, because ultimately what these patterns achieve are swings of a pendulum between extreme optimism and extreme pessimism. And once the extreme in one way or the other of mass social psychology is reached, then the pendulum starts swinging back the other way. And so, for example, in an asset bubble, for that particular asset and collectively, there is extreme levels of optimism. All right. And so these asset bubbles only occur in the periods of time when there is also extreme optimism in general in society, before the pendulum starts swinging back to pessimism and negativity. When the pendulum swings back to negativity, it doesn't take as long to reach the other extreme of extreme pessimism, because crashes unfold much quicker than rising levels of optimism. It takes a long time to reach a peak, but once it bursts, once the bubble bursts, the panic hits, and it's like lightning speed comparatively. Now, I'll give you an example here. In this crash, in the chart, we have the crash in 2008, and it bottomed on March 9th, 2009. On that day, by the way, the S&P 500 stock market index, one of the three main U.S. stock market indexes, made its intraday low. In other words, its very top bottom tick reached 666 points. And this was a news story in the mainstream news because of this, because of the obvious symbolism in 666 coming from the book of Revelation, an extremely negative book. This low, and by the way, it was a sign from God because of that. And I just explained how the all-time peak was a sign from God. Well, this bottom, this low in 2009 was also a sign from God. It reached 666 points, and it wasn't by accident. Furthermore, the S&P 500 index, it's called the S&P 500 index, and in Strong's Greek New Testament concordance, the 500th word is the word for Antichrist. And 666 in Bible prophecy is the number of the Antichrist. And so that's why the S&P 500 bottomed at 666. At this extreme low, God was communicating. Okay? So anyway, this low here was predicted ahead of time by Ellioticians, those that follow the Elliott wave principle. The reason why it was predicted within 2 days. It was predicted, they got it right. I followed at the time, for example, a website, Elliott Wave International, which is the biggest of the Elliott Wave websites. And they called the bottom within 2 days. They were off by 2 days, and they were calling for a multi-year rally from that bottom. And that's exactly what happened. And that's astounding beyond words to achieve something like that. And I'll explain how that was achieved. Absolutely no other people that have any sort of other type of technical or fundamental analysis regarding the stock market have even remotely achieved anything like what Elliotians have. All right? And that's because the Elliott wave principle is true. But in 2008, we had a clear, crisp, very profound 5 waves. And that's because in crashes, they show up very clearly. The 5-wave pattern shows up is very pronounced. But anyway, at this bottom, the daily investors polled survey indicated that 98% of investors were bearish, meaning that they believed that the stock market would continue to decline. This was a record, an all-time record. Never before had 98% of investors all believed that the stock market would continue to decline from that point. And that was confirmation for the complete 5 waves that the Elliotians were observing. Because as I just explained, the extremes in pessimism and optimism is exactly when the pendulum starts to reverse and go in the other direction. In this case, the reason is because there's no one left. If 98% are bearish, there's no one left to join them and further drive prices down anymore. Everyone's already on board. That's what a bubble is in the opposite. In reverse, there's no one left to join the crowd, the herd, in pushing the prices further upward because everyone is already in and fully invested. And so that's when it peaks. So it's counterintuitive. The herd is, in other words, going the opposite way of where the market is going to then go when it reaches an extreme. And then the trend reverses. Okay? And so that was confirmation of the complete 5 waves we were observing. All right. Now, just to show you, it's 5 waves. We have 1, 2, and then with this wave 3, within it is another 5 subwaves. You can even see it within this wave 1. You can see 5 subwaves within the wave 1. And within the wave 3, you also have 5 subwaves. And then we have wave 4, and then the final bigger wave 5. Okay? That's the Elliott wave principle. The third wave is always the steep, strong crash wave. In fact, it's the middle of the third wave when the average person, the average Joe, the layman, everyone, 50% of the people, more than 50% of the people start believing in the crash. Up until this time, as it starts going down, people are saying, because of the optimism still left over, people are saying, we're in a little bit of a decline right now, but things will get better. And hold tight, hang in there, persevere, don't sell your stocks, just keep going, and the stocks will eventually climb again. Of course, they were ultimately right in this case. They won't be this time, though, because the all-time peak, which will never be passed again, was made on January 5th. They were right on this case, but how many people stayed in? No one. By the time it reached the bottom, everyone was out. Only 2%. 98% were bearish, so no one was still in the market. And in other words, everyone needs to be flushed out before it can reverse and rise again. So if you were listening to the people right here saying, just hang in there, you probably weren't listening still right here because no one was saying that. And so that's herd mentality. People herd. It's a very dangerous thing within human behavior. Right now we are in a massive, what the professor of clinical psychology from Ghent University is calling a mass formation. We have it was Gustave Le Bon in the late 1800s that wrote the famous book. He wrote the famous book, the classic book, The Crowd, A Study of the Popular Mind. He predicted that as time progressed and more and more people moved into cities, this phenomenon would become more and worse and more dangerous over time and would ultimately lead to totalitarianism permanently, which is where we're headed exactly right now. The Constitution was completely shredded, utterly. Every single amendment in the Constitution was completely shredded because of COVID, except for the Second Amendment. That's the only one that survived. That's because we are moving into totalitarianism, which is ultimately leading to genocide, just like every other totalitarian movement in history, including the Nazis and Soviet communism in Russia and China, these mass formations. Anyway, we're in a mass formation because of the herd mentality. People are going with the herd and being fooled because of it. Anyway, that's another subject. So what I wanted to get to here is where we are at presently. So let's change the graph here. Well, before we move on, where we are at presently relative to the 2008 crash, if we could see where we are on the chart of the 2008 crash, it would be right here. This peak of wave 2 right here in the current crash is right here. We had peak of wave 2. And it was designed by God, I believe, that this occurred, this peak of wave 2, on the date 2/2, February 2nd. February 2nd, 2023. And so this peak of wave 2 that I'm talking about, this is the 2008 chart still, but the peak of this relative wave 2, the same peak, in other words, in the same pattern, in the present crash, occurred on the date 2/2 in 2023. Also on this date, again, I'm talking about 2/2, February 2nd, 2023, on this date that the S&P 500 peaked with its wave 2 on February 2nd, 2023, God confirmed that it's the peak of wave 2 with a prophetic sign. A prophetic sign in the stock market on the date 2/2 in 2023, God used to confirm that it is the peak of wave 2. The stock market, the S&P 500, which again symbolizes the Antichrist because of the number 500, peaked. It made its intraday peak high precisely 4.4 points below 4,200. Now, 7 times in Bible prophecy, the number 42 is associated with the period of time of the Antichrist. 4.4 hints at the 44th president, the Antichrist, and this is the S&P 500, and it was the date 2/2, and the Antichrist will have a second presidency after he replaces Kamala Harris and Joe Biden, and he will become president again through the 22nd Amendment. He will overcome the 22nd Amendment's restriction from being elected to the office more than twice through being appointed instead. And that's how he will overcome the 22nd Amendment, which is why wave 2 peaked on the date 2/2, 4.4 points below 4,200 in the S&P 500 stock market index. It's astounding. So that's where we're at. And we're at the beginning of what I said is the crash. Wave 3 is the crash, the big one. Okay? Before then, we have the decline, but everyone thinks it'll get better. Just hold on. Now, at the end of wave 2, the mass social mood is like things are getting better. That's when wave 2 peaks. And right now, especially on February 2nd, since the decline of the last few days, people thought it's getting better. And sure enough, measurements of sentiment indicate things like, for example, the retail investor being all in again. Everyone's back into the stock market. That's characteristic of wave 2. That's what happens in wave 2. And that's exactly what happened in our current case. Things have repeated. People are optimistic again. Things are going to get better. And that's exactly when wave 2 peaks. And then begins the crash. Okay? So we're like, if you look at my left arrow there, we're about like right there. Exactly. Okay? We're just beginning wave 3. And wave 2 peaked. That's today's date, March 1st, 2023. That's exactly where we're at. Okay, now I'll show you a different graph. Now, this is a chart of the stock market crash in 1929. As we can see, the big wave down, the big crash, occurred in a very short period of time. It took many years for the stock market to reach this peak of slowly building in the asset bubble, the stock market bubble. But once it burst, the panic began, and it took just 3 months, not even. It just really 2 months for the stock market to crash. And as we can see, there's a clear 5 waves. There's a clear Elliott wave, 5-wave pattern here. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And again, wave 3 is the strong crash wave. This is how it works. It's true. It's from God. And if wave 2 peaks, like I believe, on the date 2-2, that'll be proof that the Elliott wave principle is from God. Because there's obviously not an accident that wave 2 would peak on the date 2-2. Okay. So here is 1929. You can see the 5-wave pattern. By the way, this low right here in the low, there ended up being another low after this, but this was the big 5 waves down. But at the low, just as a side note, it's kind of interesting. It was the peak or extreme of pessimism, and that's the year when all the classic horror movies were the #1 box office movies. It isn't the case in any other time except for extreme pessimism years when you have the #1 movie in the box office being a horror movie. For example, it was Dracula and King Kong and Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde and others that I'm forgetting right now. But all the classics, Frankenstein. And likewise, there was a significant low after a crash from the peak in 1966 to the low in 1974. And in 1974, the #1 box office movie was The Exorcist. And the reason why horror movies are popular at lows in the stock market is that's what people feel like. They're in a pessimistic, negative mood, and these are the things that are popular. It satisfies them. They are interested in this type of thing. Likewise, music. The popular music at the lows are melancholy music. For example, in the 70s, it was John Denver. And the Beatles is another example of it's like the classic ultimate example of the optimistic band, and their #1 albums were all coincided with the peaks in major stock market peaks. Okay, anyway. Also hemlines, women's hemlines go up and down to the stock market. The dresses were extremely short in 1966, and in 1974, dresses were at the floor. The hemlines came down to the ankles in 1974, and they were never higher in 1966. And that coincided exactly with the stock market. Likewise, skyscrapers. Skyscrapers are an expression of optimism. The plans made for building the tallest skyscrapers in the world, for example, have all occurred at the stock market peaks, which, by the way, is why we've had over the last 2 decades all of these record-setting skyscrapers being built around the world. And if you look more precisely, they even occur the construction of them occurs at the peaks. All right, that's enough of that. All right, now here is a chart of where we are at today, like I was talking about. This is the peak on January 5th, 2022. We have the 5 waves down for wave 1 of a bigger wave, 5 subwaves within the wave 1. And then I hadn't explained this yet, but corrective waves are 3-wave patterns. The corrections are 3 waves. So we have a classic ABC here for the peak of wave 2, which was again on the date 2-2. 4.4 points below 4,200. Now, so we are beginning the wave 3 crash, the big, steep, powerful wave 3. That's where we're at. Another success that you'll probably never know about unless I mention it right now is that before August 16th, 2021, August 16th, I predicted that the stock market would close at, I think it was, if I recall, 32,000 650 something. All right, I looked it up again, and the close was 35,625, and the date was August 16th, as I'm showing right here. So this is from marketwatch.com. This was the close on this date. The reason why I predicted that number and that the stock market would close at that number, and I predicted this before the week began, and I said that it would occur on one day during the week. I didn't know which day, but it ended up happening on the Monday, right after I made the video. And I documented the video. I posted it with a post date ahead of time. It was fully documented, but I don't think any of the channels still have that video. So, but anyway, I predicted that. And the reason why I knew that is because if we subtract that number of days from the date, we get the day that President Woodrow Wilson died. And the reason why Woodrow Wilson was relevant at the time is that this was the Monday when the stock market closed on this day. And God was pointing to, through the Field of Dreams game on August 12th, 2021. This was the first. They've had two now, two Field of Dreams games where they play a Major League Baseball game in the cornfield in Iowa, right next to where the movie Field of Dreams was filmed, a major prophetic sign movie that God has used. It's a very, very important movie in God's signs. And the one reason being is that it points to the 1919 Chicago Black Sox, which ultimately points to Barack Obama, who's from Chicago, and on and on. That's a rabbit trail I'll refrain from going down because it's already explained in other videos, including, for example, the 1919 Black Sox curse video, which is an absolute must-watch. But that date for that game had occurred just a few days prior to this. And so that's why Woodrow Wilson was being looked at. And then it was discovered that the stock market number at the time was very close to the equivalent number of days to Wilson's death. And then that prediction was made. And then lo and behold, it came to pass. As predicted, the stock market closed at the exact number of days from Woodrow Wilson's death. But the connection between the 1919 Chicago Black Sox and Woodrow Wilson is that Woodrow Wilson was president at the time, but he also suffered his debilitating stroke during Game 2 of the World Series, the 1919 World Series scandal, where cheating was involved. And so he suffered his stroke during Game 2, and that's why, for example, the prophetic sign of Barack Obama attending Game 2 of the 2019 NBA championship series, and on and on. So that's the connection between the Black Sox and Woodrow Wilson. He presided over the time of the scandal, and the scandal also led to another figure that is Antichrist symbolism, which was the first commissioner of baseball that was installed as a result of the scandal. Okay, now other videos will talk about the significance of Woodrow Wilson. It's very important, but he is the father, if you will, of modern progressivism, which is Antichrist. Woodrow Wilson is the father of the modern progressive liberalism movement, which is evil. And it's not a coincidence that Barack Obama, for example, currently lives in the residence that Woodrow Wilson lived in. And after Woodrow Wilson left office, he stayed in Washington, D.C. I don't think there are any other presidents that did that, but except for him and Obama. They also both won Nobel Prizes. That's another thing that ties them together. And also, arguably, they both won Nobel Prizes for not doing anything except for being progressives. So also, Woodrow Wilson was the founder of the UN, the League of Nations, and Barack Obama will be the Antichrist that leads the United Nations. Also, Woodrow Wilson tried to collude his way into a third term, just like Barack Obama will collude his way into a third term. Woodrow Wilson tried to do that, but then he suffered a stroke and he was incapacitated and he couldn't do it. But that history shows, and I'm not making that up, you can read that on Wikipedia, for example. Woodrow Wilson did have a plan to try to serve a third term. And that's also a parallel with Barack Obama, who will serve a third term. So anyway, I knew that the stock market would make a close on one of those days during that week in August of 2021 for other reasons, which I won't get into, why I knew that particular week. But I knew that it would be the case because, and the closing number would be the equivalent of the number of days between Woodrow Wilson's death and that date. And Woodrow Wilson, by the way, died on the date 2/3, February 3rd, which hints at 23, and hints at Barack Obama, who wore jersey number 23. And one last thing, the reason why 23 is because of 2/3. Because in the book of Mark, in the Gospel of Mark, Jesus said that Peter, before the rooster would crow twice, Peter would deny him 3 times. And following the Antichrist and taking the mark of the Antichrist is a tantamount to denying Jesus. And so that's why one reason why 23 is used by God to point to the Antichrist. It's because it's pointing to the mark of the Antichrist. Yes. And another reason why is because there are 23 chromosomes. But that's another story. So there you have it. Okay, I think this video is done. This was an interesting video that explains these stock market signs, and the timing to put this video out and this information is good because it's coinciding with this prediction that the stock market peaked on 2/2, a wave 2 peak, and it will confirm the stock market sign on that date, which identifies the Antichrist, the 44th president. Because again, the S&P 500 made its peak at precisely 4.4 points below 4,200. Once this prediction has come to pass, you should know that you need to watch every minute of every video on this channel and read the homepage of the website trumpprediction.com or harriscrashprediction.com. Time is running out, and if for some reason you don't have enough time to watch all of the videos on this channel, I will leave a list of the most important videos in the description box below this video or on the homepage of the website. In terms of God's prophetic signs and knowing what God is doing, after having watched this video, you are now one of the most informed people on the planet. The question is, what will you now do with this information? And how many people will you help get this video to? Keep on posting the link to this video everywhere in social media. And if you would like the PDF file for the flyer I hand out on busy street corners, place on car windshields in busy parking lots, and put in mailboxes, please contact me at darrenjacksinbox@gmail.com. In my opinion, every single believer, unless they have a health condition, should be doing something like this in the streets every day. Also, everyone should have some of these flyers in their pockets, handing them out as they go about their daily business, when they walk from their car into the bank or to the grocery store. As they walk up and down the aisles of the grocery store, hand them out to people. I personally don't know what someone is thinking if they are not doing this. And if someone thinks that they are too shy to do this, what I have to say is get over it. Courage isn't a lack of fear. It is action in spite of it. And God wants us to be courageous for him. Keep in mind Jesus' parable of the 10 bags of gold. The bags of gold represent our abilities and opportunities, and the servants represent Christians. The knowledge in this video and the knowledge of the Lord's timing is a bag of gold. The Christian that did nothing with his bag of gold was banished to hell. The Reformed, Lutheran, Calvinist, once saved, always saved theology that says that a Christian doesn't have to do anything is false and is deception from Satan.
And believe me, the reason why God has given me a voice through these predictions is to prove what I have just said. Make sure you watch the 23 church signs video on this channel. Also keep in mind Ezekiel chapter 33. But if the watchman sees the sword coming and does not blow the trumpet, so that the people are not warned, the sword comes and takes any one of them, that person is taken away in his iniquity, but his blood I will require at the watchman's hand. If you choose to not do anything about the information you have learned in this video, in other words, tell and warn others about it, it would have been better for you to not have learned this in the first place. Aliens and UFOs are demons masquerading as aliens and UFOs. The Pope is the first of the two antichrists. Catholicism isn't the Bible and isn't Christianity. There will likely be a massive Mary ghost that the whole world will see, but it will be demonic deception. Praying to Mary is praying to demons. Most people's spiritual experiences are demonic deception, especially if they are not a true follower of Christ. All of the supernatural experiences that Catholics experience that confirm for them that Catholicism is true are demonic deception. The same applies to all other false religions and New Age spirituality. In 2 Thessalonians, it says we get the deception we ask for. In other words, it is foolish to rely on spiritual or mystical experiences, and those that do are asking for demonic deception. The supernatural highs from yoga and meditation are demonic deception. They are the counterfeit Holy Spirit. There is absolutely no New Age or collective consciousness type of explanation for how these predictions were known ahead of time. They were known ahead of time through Bible prophecy and watching for God's prophetic signs. Jesus was not just another supposed enlightened master like the supposedly enlightened Buddha. Jesus was God incarnate, and he is the only way to eternal life and to God the Father. The New Age religion and new spirituality is in truth worship of the self. It is transgression of the first commandment, and it is the height of false idolatrous, false God worship. We are not God. We are not part of God. God is holy, which is a Hebrew word that means separate from. The big deception in the end times will be New Age spirituality, and this satanic deception will merge with Catholicism. The purpose for these predictions, the reason why God has given me a voice through these predictions, is to prove the things that I am saying. The New Age religion is deception from Satan designed to keep someone in their pride and for repenting for their sins, and for admitting that they need to be forgiven and that they need a Savior, Lord Jesus Christ. New Age religion is essentially atheistic spirituality, and New Age spirituality and New Agers are essentially narcissistic, immature children that are rebelling against a disciplinary father. Contrary to what New Agers and Muslims say, the Bible has not been tainted or changed. This is a lie from Satan. There is no evidence for this. And in fact, the evidence is overwhelmingly to the contrary. There is a spiritual reality behind the material world that we see. The wages for sin is death. Sin means to miss the mark. No one is good, all have sinned. Because of sin, people are captives of the ruler of this world, Satan. People's souls belong to Satan, whose power over people is death. God took the form of a man, Jesus Christ, and paid the ransom that is owed to the ruler of this world. Through Christ's death and resurrection, he defeated sin and he overcame Satan's power in death. It is through Christ and his Spirit that it is possible for everyone to be forgiven of their sin, and we can have eternal life if we choose it. We can choose to follow Jesus out of captivity from sin and Satan, or we can choose to reject this and remain a slave to this world, sin, and to Satan. If one rejects Jesus Christ, after they die, they will pay the price for their sin in hell, and then they will die the second death, and their soul will cease to exist.
Believing in Christ means much more than simple intellectual agreement. It means to repent of sin and completely commit one's life and become a willing slave to Jesus and his kingdom. Jesus said we need to be born again, which implies a death of the self and a death to this world. Believing in Jesus implies living out one's faith through taking action that typically involves risk and sacrifice. This demonstration of faith through action is what it means to have faith and to believe in Jesus. Some Christians will tell you otherwise, but they are deceived and they ignore countless passages in the Bible. Obviously, when these predictions come to pass, you will know that you should watch all of the videos on this channel, beginning with the videos that are linked to in the description box below this video. I strongly recommend not going through the videos on this channel in random fashion, selecting titles that may be interesting, but rather I strongly recommend following my recommendations that are listed in the description box below this video. This channel is not a daily or weekly update on the latest news. Rather, this channel is a library that has documented God's true big picture of signs, patterns, and connections. Hopefully you at least found this introduction video to be interesting, and if so, please leave a like and upvote the video, and please consider sharing the video. It is essential that everyone immediately read the homepage of my website, TrumpPrediction.com, or PredictionsProveIt.com, and also check out the other information that I have linked to on the website. You should also pause this video right now and make a note of my other social media outlets. You never know when you will need them, and you might not be able to find them later. Also, if you want to download these videos as podcasts, I now have a podcast channel at Podbean, which is named Predictions Prove It.